So you're all very welcome here this evening. My name is Liam Quaid. I'm a local councillor here, and I'm delighted to introduce you to Professors Mary Bourke of Trinity College Dublin and Professor Paul Quinn of the James Hutton Institute in Aberdeen. And Mary and Paul are both experts in the area of nature-based solutions to flooding. I've been interested for many months in hosting a public meeting on this subject and the potential for pursuing nature-based solutions as part of our overall flood management plan for East Cork. I've been liaising with experts in the area and have been learning about the importance of considering land use among the many factors that influence flood risk. I had made contact with Mary some months back, and more recently Mary and Paul have been commissioned by the OPW and the Council to undertake an assessment of the potential for nature-based solutions upstream in East Cork, and they very kindly agreed to tie in a public meeting to their trip here this week. This is an area with great potential, not only in helping us to mitigate flood risk in parts of East Cork, but also in giving communities a much-needed sense of autonomy and an opportunity to work together on this enormous and complex challenge that too often leaves us feeling powerless. If pursued at scale, we would see our government offering significant financial incentives to farmers in return for temporarily storing water on their land and for the construction of natural features such as leaky dams. We would see dynamic engagement between local communities, landowners, the council, the OPW, the Department of Environment, Inland Fisheries Ireland and Quilcha. There are potentially more modest versions of these nature-based solutions that can be pursued in certain parts of East Cork as we scale up our ambition and hopefully get buy-in from government. It's very important to say that tonight's meeting is not about the Midleton Flood Relief Scheme, and it's not about presenting a challenge to that proposal. Also, many of you will have very legitimate frustration with the pace of progress around flood management in East Cork, both prior to October 2023 and since. Our speakers this evening are not responsible for any of these delays and are here to share learning from a wealth of professional experience on the importance of considering land use and nature-based solutions in our flood management plans. And I think to make the best use of our time this evening, it's important that any general frustrations about the response of the Council or the OPW or the Government to flood risk to date are best kept for another forum. Before I finish, I'd like to thank Eamon Horgan, who travelled around villages in East Cork and North Cork last weekend to distribute posters advertising this event. And I'd really like to thank My Place for their fantastic hospitality this evening. And now I'll hand you over to Professors Mary Bourke and Paul Quinn. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for making time to come and listen to us. So we're educators. I now still work at a university, and Paul used to work at a university. And so my job tonight here is to transfer knowledge to you. Knowledge is power. And so the first 11 minutes of this slide presentation will be introducing you to what nature-based solutions are. And Paul will then pick up the talk and be more specific about some proof of concept of how they may or may not work in certain situations. All right? So I'm welcoming questions about, what they are and what they look like, or if I use any non-accessible language, call me on it, and I'm very happy to stop and explain it again. Because the one thing I want you to leave here with is knowledge. I want you to be able to say, I know what a nature-based solution is, I know what I can and I cannot do, I kind of have a grasp of the benefits, but I might need to go and read a little bit about it. But Mary has given me an indication of where I might go and find information about that. All right? So, we'll start with a general definition, twice, of what they are. So, what are nature-based solutions? So they have been in their past, in their history, been called quite a few different things. You may have heard of natural water retention measures. That's Europe's version of it. You may have heard of natural flood management. That's the UK's version of it. Here we're now going to use a more umbrella term and just talk about nature and how it can be used to enhance and reduce actually the risk of damage from floods. the really important message to take home from this first slide is we are talking about the whole catchment. We all, no matter where you're from or where you've been today or where you were on your holidays, we are always in a catchment. We are always in a catchment, right? And so we need to start thinking holistically about solving issues that we have in catchments by looking at the entire catchments. Doing what you can, where you are, with what you have, okay? So missing no opportunity, using every tool in the toolbox that we can to reduce what we perceive as being bad news or hazards that are affecting our lives and livelihoods. So, in general, we're talking about restoring catchments. Now, you'll never get it back to the way it was before humans came here 5,000 plus years ago. But we can restore some of its natural functioning that works for us rather than against us. So we want to restore the catchment processes that we have inadvertently, unintentionally, stopped functioning as well. So, and we're going to focus now on restoring that with eyes on floods. How can they be used to help us with our floods? So the key kind of underlying concept here is to use a large number of small interventions dispersed around the catchment. These tend to be and are often low cost and low risk for that particular measure in that location. But together they may produce something that is more impactful, but that's subject to the specific controls of your catchment. So I'm a geomorphologist. I'm going to start up where the water starts and move down. So I'm going to focus really on what we call the headwaters, where the springs are way up at the top of the mountains, where the rivers begin. So many of our mountains, and particularly over the west coast, you've got the Atlantic blanket bogs covering a lot of our mountain tops. This organic soil, this peat, which has been harvested and still is in some places, has been harvested industrially. So the natural functioning of the bogs is gone in many locations. Now we're very lucky to have a peatland restoration scheme that the MPWS have basically found millions of euro to enact and put in place all around Ireland, including in the southwest. And so we're talking about the fact, come on in and sit up, the seats up at the front. Come up to the front of the classroom.
Yeah.
I'll be asking you a question now.
The students all have to come.
Yeah. So you know that the peatlands have been drained, right? They've been put in these deep, sometimes quite deep, but channels, and that's to get the water out of them so that they could use them for agriculture. And it's really lowered the functioning of the peat bogs. So now, in terms of restoring them, they're trying to raise the water table, and they're doing that by putting in these dams in these channels, often bits of peat that they've taken from beside these channels, or they use wood, and sometimes they've been using plastic, which we don't like. But it ends up basically just storing the water, and the entire water table of the peatland comes back up to healthy for the peatland level. And that allows, so what the way I'd like you to think about it is, it's stopping the rushing of water from the peatlands. Because that's what's happening at the moment. We've got high velocity, high volume of water coming down from the peatlands. So we want to keep it there for longer in its own, the way it's meant to function. So that's peatlands. But also in the uplands, we've got opportunities for planting native trees, not necessarily commercial at all, because the commercial plantations also need drainage. So the general term afforestation, there are grants there to do that in certain places. They will work very effectively. So another key message here, and I know Paul will repeat this, is the right measure in the right place to be most effective. So trees in general are obviously good for lots of reasons. Their efficacy in reducing floods, there is some debate about it. When you first plant a forest and it's growing and it's doing its job of setting down roots and increasing the permeability of the soil, that's all good for rain coming down and infiltrating into the soil rather than running straight off the soil and into your rivers. When they mature, they're not as effective in terms of that rate of increase of being effective. Plus, a lot of our native species are deciduous. So in winter, when we get most of our rain, there's no leaves on the trees to intercept that rainfall and to be as effective as in the summer. So with all of these, there are pros and cons, and there is no quick fix, there is no miracle measure. Everything will have some kind of another opinion about it, which we welcome. There's no magic wand as such, but they can be effective, they can have a positive effect, both for flood mitigation and for loads of other reasons, for carbon storage, etc. So here's a list of all of the benefits, the so-called co-benefits: biodiversity, soil and water quality, sequestering carbon, of course, and that's a very strong argument for the peatlands as well. We're stopping all of those organics coming down from the peatland drains into our rivers. Reducing soil erosion, improved agriculture, particularly when it's mixed in with agriculture under the agro-environmental schemes, drought reduction. So I know a lot of you here are interested in floods, but we need to talk about the other end of the spectrum too, because droughts are also a hazard for us. There was a wonderful study by the climatologists, undertaken by the climatologists of Maynooth University, which went back using written records and found that we had a decade-long drought back in the early 1800s. I didn't know that, and that's catastrophic for everyone in terms of our water resources and agricultural productivity. So we need to be thinking about what can we do that will help us with both floods and droughts, and nature-based solutions we would proffer can help in that way. And of course, improving public health and well-being. I mean, we have been walking around some of the most gorgeous areas of the catchment upstream here, and it's actually quite healing and quite lovely in many places. So that is a very important factor to be considered as well. So if we look at what we would call online features, they're on the line of the river, they're in the river channel themselves. There is this feature known as a leaky dam. These are really small. I'll tell you now that we don't have enough water in our rivers, upstream, way up in the mountains. And this is different from many other jurisdictions that do have forests growing on their floodplains, and they have a lot of woody debris that falls naturally into rivers, and it's fantastic for the biodiversity. Leaky dams are things that we can build ourselves. Either if we come across a tree that's fallen across these, now we're talking about small streams. These are streams where a tree, if it falls across it, covers it from bank to bank. And it has a function of, stopping other woody debris when it comes down, and the biodiversity around them from international studies has been shown to be quite important. It can affect the riverbed shape in terms of pools and what we call riffles, these where you can see the white water and the rocks peeking out at the top of the water in a river. These are really important for fish breeding areas and for the general health of a river. So wood in rivers, by a fluvial geomorphologist, considered to be a very, very good thing. Wood mobilised and coming down into villages and towns and blocking and damming bridges and destroying and enhancing erosion around roads is not. But there are ways in which you can stabilise the wood effectively to stay in place during floods. So the next measure I want to talk about is we talked about online, one example of an online feature, now let's talk about offline. So it's not on the river, but it's on part of the property of the river, which is its own floodplain. So a floodplain is an area of flat land that is formed by the river during floods, that is adjacent to the river and is often occupied by the river when it floods. It brings nutrients to these fields, and that's why so many farms work in this area adjacent to the channel, because the soils tend to be quite good. A lot of private landowners, farmers in upland areas think we're talking about flooding their land, and we are not. Another important concept I'd like you to leave the room with is we're talking about the temporary storage of water. And our experience tells us that it's between 6 and 12 hours. Maybe in winter when the soils are really wet, it might be 24 hours. But it leaves the land. And it leaves the land, in our experience, with not very much damage to any grass that's growing in it. So how might we enhance the floodplains themselves to help us mitigate floods through the temporary storage of water. So basically, floodplains are not flat. They often have this morphology to them where you have dips and hollows in them, or even the trace of the old river as it was along the back of the floodplain. So you have areas that are naturally hollowed out that we can enhance the storage by putting in a structure that might hold water there for a little bit, but allow it to drain much more slowly. Or if it doesn't, we can build structures on the floodplain. An example here, I think Paul, you'll show it in action in your section, is basically a fence, a wooden fence, and it's leaking, it's meant to leak. Remember, we want the water there temporarily, just slow it down. So it's storing quite a volume of water there, and it's moving across the floodplain back into the channel. This is a video, this was taken in Wicklow, close to where I live, of a flood, and I bet you've all seen this. Just pouring out rainfall at the wrong time, just after ploughing, and it falls on the field and the soil, and that's muddy down the drain right there. All of the nutrients from the soil are being washed away with that water, leading off to gullies, etc. So an option is, instead of having this feature on the right here, which shows that kind of gullying of water going out the farm gate, is to build what we would call a bund, which is this low, often less than a metre, arcuate, earthen structure with a small pipe that will allow the water, again, to be stored temporarily and leak out much, much slower than it would if it was just free-flowing. It also has the potential to store some of the sediment that's in suspension, has time to settle out, depending on how quickly it's draining. And in this particular example here, they built it, and I think the flood happened the next day or something. It was like, oh my gosh. And it eroded, the water coming off the field eroded that feature a little bit, and had to go back in and extend the limbs up the field. And that's another kind of property of these features, is they're dynamic in terms of we need to understand how they respond to floods, and we need to be prepared to go in and maintain them and fix them to do the best job that they possibly could. So, some of you might have read something this week about nuisance floods. Hands up, everybody who understands what a nuisance flood is. In the newspaper, one person, brilliant. Well, let me tell you that they are basically just floods that get in your way a little bit. They stop you from getting your kids to school, or maybe you have to drive 4 miles instead of 40 metres. You have to go the long way around to deliver yourself to your job, to pick up the groceries, to attend to doctor's appointments and stuff. And there are costs associated with all of that, all of those inconveniences. So there's a theory that I've adopted from the United States that talks about nuisance floods. And these are, in the United States, they're considered to be the coastal floods that come in. And if you add up all the costs of each of those lower magnitude floods that have caused a nuisance but have cost you something, if you add them all up, because they occur far more frequently than the big flood, the work that's been done in the United States has shown that they end up costing the economy a lot more than the big floods. So there's a role for paying attention to these nuisance floods as it costs us. And I think that that is the place that we should be focusing our attention on when we're trying to deploy nature-based solutions to flooding. So, before I hand over to Paul, I'd like you to feel a little bit more empowered when you leave here, with knowledge, but also maybe with an idea of what we might all do together moving forward. So there's natural questions about how we might do this. Do we do it through institutions that are already in charge of floods, and/or do we do it ourselves through forming community groups that grow and take on the responsibility of installing some of these features in certain places in our landscape? Who are the people that can help you out at a community level if you do that? Who are the people that, will give you advice, transfer the knowledge to you? Well, hopefully people like us, people who are also interested in flooding issues and alternative ways of dealing with them. Where do you put your leaky dam? Where's the best place? Because we are looking at the right place and the right measure in the right place. So some places are really appropriate and other places are absolutely not appropriate. They may do more damage than they can do benefit. So it's important to understand that. And all of these ideas, a list of features, fine, but actually you need a plan, and you need a plan of catchment scale. And how do you go about making that happen? So, how long will it take? It'll take time. Everything takes time, okay? When to start? 10 years ago. Tomorrow, all right? So just start. How is it to be paid for? We're working on that. As academics, we are working hard on that to try and influence policy and practice at a government level. But we're coming up to a general election. So we need to all think about maybe getting bespoke funds set aside so the communities can not have that battle of where to find money. The money's there, you need to apply for it, you need to meet certain criteria, but that's not going to be the barrier. The barrier will be having the people on the ground to be able, with the knowledge and the skills and the power, to basically install some of these measures. So, I will now hand over to Paul, who will talk about the evidence, how we might begin, and use his experience from Ireland and the UK. Thanks.
It's Coca-Cola, it's not whiskey. You haven't been next door yet. So you can see that we've got a big picture, and that's what Mary's trying to say, is that lots of people have tried lots of things, and there's this kind of weight of evidence that we can do so. What we've done more recently in Ireland in the Slow Waters project that Mary ran, and with the UCC guys at the back there talked to, is we tried to look at how do we get this going. There's a lot of interesting water quality and biodiversity, but we said, well, can we pull this together and make it work for flooding? I think I built my first feature on a farm, a research farm, in 2003. Okay, and I'm still going. In a way, we've made some progress, but it's sometimes 2 steps forward and 1 step back. And it's always, but I feel as if we have moved forward over time. And so we're at a place now where we think we can tell you some things that might help you out. And it's up to you guys to, if you think we're talking nonsense, then you can throw it out. But so I'll show you some evidence from real case studies, people who have been flooded. Okay? And what it really is taking many of the things that Mary said and tuning them in for flooding. We've learned a lot of stuff, and if we were to put thousands of kilometres of buffer stripping, little non-cultivated zones on farms, or plant some more trees, and it rains and you don't get flooded, you can say, well, was it worth it? So I think that it's always good to slow things down and to infiltrate if you can. But the situation we're going to be in for flooding is the soil's going to be full, the peat's going to be full, the soil's going to be full, the forests are going to be full, and it's still raining. So our lesson, so the second take-home message is you need spare capacity when the big flood comes. And that's one thing we learned about flooding. If you can't do that, then we're going to have some impact, but not as much impact as we could. So nature-based solutions is this new term. I didn't know I did nature-based solutions. Somebody came and told me that. Okay. So what I did when I went to Newcastle University, I was really keen. Working with ADAS, this is an agricultural organisation, and I could see all the water just flowing off the farm down the drains, unchecked. And I said, well, why don't you just put something in the way? And they were, go away, you're mad. So I started building these things in our research farms to build up some confidence. And then a guy came along and said, do you think this would work for this village that we've got that's been flooded? I said, yeah, it'll cost you. He says, don't worry. So the flooding budget is much bigger than the water quality and biodiversity. They just tend to spend on big features and haven't really grasped the opportunity to have some balance between defences and prevention. So that's what we're going to try and get across to you now in some case studies. So I'm kind of repeating a little bit what Mary said. There's lots of ways of intercepting water. There's buffer strips, or we call these magic margins, that are kind of really rough zones that just intercept the water and kind of keep it out of the channel. We've got all sorts of bunds. These leaky barriers, I like big leaky barriers. I don't like little leaky barriers, I like really big ones. And we've also got, if you are going to put some land across to the environment, make it work. So here we put sediment traps, engineered buffers. So a bit of evidence now, and it's almost like I'm going to pick up a feeling in the room here with students, with other communities, is what's the problem? So this diagram I did in 2003 for the government. And the top one there, it's supposed to look a little bit like a post-war farm. It's got its farm, but the soils are healthy, the rivers are meandering, and there's a few animals knocking around. So, so we had a big period of mechanisation and intensification and draining the fields. So the people recognise that as an issue. People recognise that we've changed the way our land has been managed. For good, we all need food. Don't ever get me wrong, I'm always on the side of the farm. I love crisps, okay? I love chips, trust me. And guineas. Well, that's something like that. But the idea that we have changed our landscape, do people believe that? Do people think it hasn't been changed? Alright, so we just need to accept that things have changed in the past. More flooding, more pollution, more drought, less biodiversity, carbon less. Anybody want to go against me there? Okay. I have had people say no. Here's an example from Scotland, seeing as I now work in Scotland. This is the Tyne River that we work on. This is what the landscape used to look like, with braided rivers and water flowing down from the hills. This is what it looked like at the end of the Great Farming period. Okay? And so there's this kind of attitude about taming the wilderness. It's kind of bringing things under control, seen as a good thing. But you can see the density of channels has changed, configuration, and there's no braided river. Somebody said to me, geomorphologist, there's no natural rivers in the UK. They're all unnatural. Okay, so you should either be a braided river or a swamp. The rivers where you've got are highly managed. But so this is what it looks like now. So some of those blue lines have gone, some of them have become bigger, and all the other blue lines are now underground. Okay, so we're still there, but we're just underground. So do you think that's fair enough that the land has changed in this way? Okay, so we've got two things now that have changed. The final one that we have to choose, we try to, this is kind of a worst case scenario, trust me, so some of the fields we've seen today, which are grassland, are not as bad. But in order to get a crop, in many places, you have to drain the land. Otherwise you don't get a crop. And we had 200 years of intensification, so we have got compacted soils. Even good quality soils are more compact. And this gives us a situation where most of the action that occurs in the soil occurs in the top 30 centimetres, even though your soil might be 2 metres deep or 10 metres deep. When it rains, all the action occurs in hours, not in days and months. So we've got lots of mechanisms that take water away. So the two photographs here is here's a field, similar to the one Mary showed. Lots and lots of water, at least some of it's being retained. But this was about September, October, when you dig down through that soil, it's bone dry. It's saturated at the surface, but it's dry below. And it actually takes the whole of the winter for it to wet up. It takes the whole of the summer to dry down. So we just want to get this across to people that things have changed. And they might look green, like the bottom one here, nice grassy fields, but they're generating more runoff. I think we've got good confidence. We can't say farming causes flooding, we've never said that. But farming causes more runoff. We're very confident on that. So we don't tend to blame ever. So I don't know if you're familiar with the hydrogen that we've shown in hell. But if this a really big one comes through, then you need to store it. Slowing is good, storing is better. So here's our first case study. Do people believe that? That's it. So we're trying to tell you that we're not just making this up, we've done this for a long time. So, a case study. So a chap from the Environment Agency said, we've got this village in Northumberland. No, I was at Newcastle University then, and he says, it's flooded 7 times in 7 years. Okay, well, that sounds a bit bleak. But, so we had kind of what we call a flood-rich period. It just rained all the time, and then we've had a bit of flood poor period, and these tend to come and go. So they said, well, what can you do? And they'd had a traditional civil engineering company saying, we can put a nice big pond here on the edge of town, you know, because you're 2.5 million. This is back 2007. 2.5 million, and that will do a 1 in 50 year flood, you know, moderately big flood. And they said, well, we can't justify it because there's only one caravan park and 30 houses that get flooded. And then there's all the nuisance of it. You can't drive through the village and things. It takes a bit of clearing up. So we said, well, we'll give it a go. They'd been to our research farm, seen all our features. And we said, what's it cost you? He said, so he gave us £200,000, which to us seemed like a lot of money. So it's 6 square kilometres. So you can see the field boundaries there, you can see the size of the village. So you can try and imagine what villages these are, similar to in Midleton. So what we did is we scattered the picture that Mary said, we've scattered them around the place. We've got leaky dams, we've got barriers in fields, we've got on and offline ponds, and we've got all sorts of combinations. But when we finished phase 1, we had about 35 features, draw-offs, and that's in 7 square kilometres. But we didn't spend all £200,000. And the actual complaint is, why haven't you spent all the money? Because we've done it so cheaply. So we had some money left, so we actually put in 3 much bigger features, because we're actually getting quite good at it back then. And they're against the road, so there's a lot of flooding on the road. And we had to get a construction company to do that, because you can't just go out and stop the traffic. But you can, but you get arrested. And so we actually had 2 big online ponds and a really big offline pond. And so more floods have come through Belford. In fact, during our study, there was 4 1 in 100 year floods. I know that doesn't sound like it makes sense. But remember, return interval is actually just a magnitude. So we had 4 enormous floods and nobody was flooded in Belford. Okay? And the headlines was pioneering ponds, save Belford, possibly. So we've spent time now trying to work out why that is. JBA replicated it. One of them has just done a recent survey of this, and they said that they believe it was the big ponds that made the biggest difference. And I'm sort of believing that myself. The other ones are helpful, they work for pollution and other things, and very nice. Well, the fact that we have available storage when the big storm comes seems to make a difference. The other thing that JBA said is some of those ponds have lost their capacity because the farmers, or the farmers' sons, that's what we believe in, have been driving their vehicles across the end of these ponds, just taking a little shortcut and then another little shortcut. Some of our ponds have lost half their capacity. And recently, 3 houses were flooded. And so we need maintenance to be part of the story. Let's whiz around now. So this is the pond that Mary showed. So we spoke to the farmer and said, we want to put a pond in this field, we'd like to put a big bund. He says, you're not touching my soil. So he chose to use wood. That wood goes into the ground 1 metre. And you can see he's been fixed the contour. And I said, we believe that this is a place where we'll see a lot of overland flow. The farmer said, never. So when the big storm came, we call this the Morpeth flood. Morpeth was wiped away. He came out and we were out there and there was a river of overland flow. So it was worth its weight in gold to just see this river of water coming out and the farm to be there. And that's the manner of design for me. And you can see that the water spills out the end and takes a long tortuous route back to the channel. But to make sure it filled, we also drew off some water from the channel. But the water has to get very high, and then we just take the peak off. So this is both an on and offline feature. And the rest of the time, it just has cows in it. You see it's a strong structure, it's a civil engineer structure, it's not going anywhere. And that can take the cows having a good stretch as well. Okay, so we want these to be low impact, but as I said, the farmer preferred wood to soil. So we had another place, which we've seen quite a lot of them in Midleton, is very steep banks coming to little floodplains, difficult to cultivate. So we found a location where there was these little floodplains. So we put very, very big leaky dams in. So what these do is they back up the water and throw it across the floodplain. So we've chopped down some trees. They were sort of saying, oh, should we be chopping down trees? Well, to the Environment Agency, these were sycamore trees. And they said, oh, we hate sycamore trees, so off they went. But we do tend to, if we can, use a process called spiraling, which is where you split the tree and you bring the tree down into the channel, and the tree's still alive. So we like to build living barriers now. Okay. Something that we learn all the time. And then here we are in an arable field, and there's the village just below. So you can see we've got a pond, very similar to what Mary said. You see the big pipe that lets most of the water out, and the rest of the water goes through the subsurface land drains that we know exist. And this is what it looked like during the flood event. Tells us two things. One, we stopped the murky water temporarily, but we also built it as a road. So the farmer got something out of this. And that's the kind of quid pro quo of this. If we can work with the farmers, he says, you could put me a new drain in, or can you put me a new road in, or a new wall, fix the wall. There's ways and means of doing that, so everybody gets something out of the deal. And you can see the very effect. And all that happens is the sediment is just ploughed back into the system. And that's where you get all the big crops, because it's full of nutrients. So they're all small, but they all do a little bit of work. This is a fully offline pond. So this farmer was in a buffer strip scheme, so he had 15 metres of buffer strip. So we excavated this little hollow here, and then kind of completed the kind of levee that was already at the edge there. And then you can see water coming in, and it gets temporarily stored, and then it goes through a pipe, and it's gone again into a hole. What I'm going to show you now is the science bit. So we've monitored these, so we know exactly how they function. Everything about them. We know what's happening, we know how much water's going in, how much is stored, and how much is left. So this box here represents this pond. So if you go back to our big storm, this is the big storm. The second line is if I had 5 of these. Yeah. The next storm is 10. So even with 10 of these, we can't see the mouse. Okay.
Use the mouse.
The mouse, that one. Oops, sorry. Don't give me technological questions. So the first line, the dark blue line, is the storm coming through. The second one is with 5 ponds, no impact. With 10 ponds, no impact. 15 ponds, yes, some impact. 20 ponds, suddenly we get really big bang for our buck. So we can also turn that into volume. So if you put this amount of volume in this area, you get this impact. So if we have 30 of these ponds, for this one, about 8,000 cubic meters, you get a good impact. But this experiment only ran up to 3.5 square kilometers, so 8,000 cubic meters of storage, offline storage, in 3 square kilometers. So that got people thinking, it might work. Just a few more examples to show you opportunities. So once you find a nice big floodplain like this, and you go back, historically, the river used to flow across there. But what somebody in the great farming period said, why don't I just straighten this channel and I can turn this back into farmland? But it never was that good farmland. It still has some sheep on it. So what we've done is, they said, you can't touch that channel now, it's there and it's got good ecological status. And so you can see all this peaty water now, so when the river rises 5 to 10 times a year, the water goes onto the floodplain. And that's so the National Trust were very interested in carbon. We were thinking it would be good for flooding, but to make sure it's good for flooding, right down the far end, we built a large hole. So you can see the hammocks in there. We also built a sediment trap for all the runoff, and this backs the water, so shallow there. We can't even calculate how much water is stored there. It's like in and out of the soil. And just to show you that it is an engineered structure, so sometimes when we build a big structure, you have to prove to in this case the OPW, that it's not going to go anywhere. So it's not a hobby, it's engineering. So when you find a location, you use it. Here's just another one near Holt Whistle. That poor person there on the end of it, this is called kite cam. And she's got a camera on a kite there, so she's actually tethered to the ground to stop her blowing away. But you can see we've put a sequence of these ponds in peaty soils, organic soil. The actual width here of the pond at the front is about 6 metres wide. And the woman who owned this land said, "Oh, this is great, at least I can get my horses from one side of the valley to the other without going through the water." That was her benefit, but here, these store a large amount of water, and a good digger driver who knows what they're doing can do this. But in this, this rather flashy diagram is just to show you that we do other bits of science and try and map where more water moves through a farm. So the kind of square bits are field boundaries. And this is the plan we've made for one of our farms. So we've got things like buffer strips for biodiversity and pollution. We've stopped water going into some of the drains, put them into a sediment trap. But if you want this to be also a flooding project, you have to have the ponds. So it's great when we slow things down, but if you want it to work for flooding, you've got to add the storage. Yeah? So that's why we're coming with a message. It's not just nature-based solutions, it's focused nature-based solutions. So 2 big ponds here would be great for this size of area. And all the water, you can see the orange bits are where the water's flowing. So let's just show you a quick example from the work we've just recently done. So we're only showing the work from Wexford. We've got a great team from University College Cork here who can show you some more local work. And so we thought, how should we do this? So we wanted to say, can we stop flow? So it's almost like we had to prove, mainly working with chaggers, that we went to their research sites to try and find all these features. And we concluded there were ample opportunity in the farm landscape for these ponds. That's our conclusion. But they also said prove it. So there's lots of data in Ireland. So we've got Maria's our GIS expert. She'll be putting all this together. So we've got all the terrain data. We know where the water is. We can produce all these maps, mapping where the water flows when it's raining. But you get down to cases. Here's a little part of the catchment down in Wexford. And you can see the orange bits are the high flows, the blue bits are the very high flows. It picks out the drainage system. But you can also see these bulky blue bits here. They're floodplain. Floodplains are fantastic, because that's what they were designed for, flooding. Okay. So we're looking for floodplains that flood, but usually they've only got this much water on them, okay, and they're flowing. So we wanted to back that up and put it to 1 metre of depth, 10 times the volume, but just for temporary storage. So the questions that Mary posed, who, where, how, when, this is what you do. So the beginning is we've got to get onto some farms, start talking to some people, and see if we can walk around with some experts and say, this is a perfect place. Okay? So we'd like to just do a few of them in the next few months or next year. So this is perfect, this is me. This is perfect. And then the right place, designed well, and it won't get washed away, and for the right purpose. So sometimes you build it for water quality, sometimes you build it for water quantity, flooding. So this is perfect for flooding. So this is to hold as much water as we can on the floodplain. So here's one we did earlier. So I press escape now, do it? So back to the start.
Yeah.
So we built this pond in the corner of the field. This is actually Storm Babbitt, which you know about. And you can see this is the biggest storm that's ever been through this pond. So you can see this on. We can go back again if you want. So you can see the dog is for scale, so we used a small dog. But there's about 600 cubic metres stored here, and you can see these huge amounts of water. Just leave it there, we'll just leave it on the screen. But you can see that some water is coming over the top. I was really shocked, the fact that this huge pond that had been perfectly designed was overtopping. So we're always getting amazed just by how big the next storm is going to be. But it's done its work, so there's less water going out than coming in, so it fills up. So So we'll finish that, we'll go back to PowerPoint, back to here. That's what I'm saying is, yes, back to PowerPoint. Right, so I'll just forward. Okay, so this is the bundle joint construction. So we're trying to show you, well, is this a big interference on your farm? So we've tucked it away in the corner. This is Seamus and his digger, and we've built the biggest possible storage pond in the best location. There's a lot of materials. This is the soil bund. You can see the kind of cross section there, that's where we put the overflow in. And if you went there now, in fact we went there with 70 people at a conference, we took them to the corner of the field and said, do you know where the feature is? And nobody could see it because it was hidden. Okay? So the footprint of this is small, a small loss of land, but in terms of the overall benefits, it seems almost neutral in terms of cost of the farm. And there's a longer story about farmers' attitude to this that we influence there. But you can see that's what it is. It's kind of a digger for a week. Yes, so we'll finish just showing you how we put it all together. So the bund is there in the corner with the star, that's got a little depth recorder there. But in order to make it work, we draw water off substantially upstream. So this wooden structure here keeps water in the river till we're ready. And when the big one comes, it goes over the top. So we worked it out by studying the water level in the channel. And so the water flows down across this floodplain 200 metres. 200 metres of slow flow rather than 200 metres of fast flow. There was a location where the water would go back into the river. The farmers now put a bridge there, so we made sure the bridge was high, so the water would go around it, and it ends up in the bus. And here's Mary and our previous student, Pierre, and that's the structure at the end which saw the water going through. That can take 1 metre cubed per second. But there was about 2 metres cubed per second, so twice as much water coming in as going out. So 1 metre cubed is a ton of water a second. Okay? You probably had 100 tons of water a second in Midleton. That's been my guess, my hand Georgia head on. But, and it's not going anywhere. These big 1 ton stones are protecting the feature. So, the conclusion was that one feature alone is not going to help anybody. So we had a little look around, and this landscape, because it's got floodplains, is perfect for other ponds. So we can start to say, well, we need to start extending. So when we come to Midleton, we'll find one location, and then we'll find a whole sequence. We might find a family of features like this. So there might be one farm who can put 5 features on. So here's the science bit again. So that alone gives us about 3,000 metres cubed of storage. And a big stone goes through for this catchment. It gave us a little bit of impact. Okay, not much, because we haven't got enough storage. So what we then have to do is walk the whole of the catchment and find more storage. So if we do the whole of the catchment, and we get up to this number again that we've got in Belford, about here 7,500 metres cubed of storage for 3 square kilometres, gives you a big impact. Okay, here's 8,000 cubic metres, about 3.5 kilometres square, so it's all these numbers. But it's the right amount of storage, and it's available in the peak of the storm. So the final message for MBS to flooding is you need some storage, and it needs to be available. When everything else is full and everything else is flowing, you still need some storage. So this is what the council are doing. They're going to make sure there's loads of spare capacity when the big storm comes. But we're saying, why not do it further up the system? And the final point is, don't let your ponds fill too quickly. They will slowly flow, but if you can keep them empty for longer, or designed like we do with this structure, which is kind of a V shape, it always keeps a little bit of spare capacity for the bigger storm. But as you saw, it did overtop a little bit. So we need as many as we can get. Alright, so I'm going to leave you with that.
What sort of maintenance is required on a comprehensive set of features, such as those cases?
I'll have to have a drink for that one. Right. The maintenance has not been resolved. So in Belford, the people who funded that project was the Environment Agency flood team. So what they do is they call it a flood asset. So all the big structures you're going to get in Midleton will be called assets. And they have to be managed by the people who build them. So it was great at Belford because they were managed by the Environment Agency. But that's not true of most schemes, where local communities are putting features in, farmer groups are putting features in. Maintenance there is a tricky problem. So I would like to think that over time, maintenance will become part of farming. Okay, if you are helping everybody out with ecosystem services, we call that flooding, drought reduction, you should be paid for that. And it doesn't have to be much, I don't think, but if you have to, every time you get a new pond, you just get more payment. So the responsibility then falls to the farmer to maintain. If you don't maintain, you lose your payment. I think that's reality, isn't it? I don't know. It's a much more complicated, but maintenance is like that. So in Belford, we've lost some of our capacity due to, literally somebody nipping off the end of the pond and lowering the capacity. So it's not resolved. We might have to resolve it here.
Is it labour intensive to maintain?
No, not really. It's a digger driver again for a couple of days. Again, somebody has to pay. Digger driver, 4,000 or 5,000 euros for one. If he brings his mate and a dumper truck, it's 10,000. So it stacks up. But it might be worth it. We have to make the case that it's worth it. You might not get flooded again for 100 years. That's not going to happen, I'm afraid. The big storms we're getting wetter and more ferocious storms. So we need to prepare for the future. So we've been looking at climate adaptation plans as a way of funding this. But it should just be day-to-day farming. That it's obvious that you're losing your topsoil to a corner of a field. That's probably a good place for a bund. That might be an online structure, but if you've got floodplain, it can be an offline structure, which means you can get both water quality benefits and flooding benefits. So it's a good question. It's unresolved. Okay, we've got to get good at this. Okay, and the problem is that nearly all the case studies I've worked on, the final results have been different. So there's no one size fits all. There's no one. What works for a dairy farmer might not work for an upland beef farm or our upland system is very different. Mixed farms are usually best because they've got some grass and some arable. So yeah. So the conclusion is, so Mary, if you want to join me now, and we'll take some questions because we've hit you with quite a lot of stuff.
And Bethany, who's joined us, is a sustainability consultant, and Maria, who's a rising fourth-year geography student, who's very interested in this as well. They'll take a microphone to anybody who wants to ask a question.
When you're anybody wants to ask a question? I'd like to ask a question.
So you used the words when we're coming to Midleton. My question is there stuff happening in the background for natural flood defenses to happen, or are you very optimistic in your thoughts?
This is day 2 of the project.
Yeah, so we are happening. So exactly what's happening is we're going to provide the Cork County Council with a map that will identify opportunities of where the right measure can be put in the right place. Then there's another phase that has to happen in terms of, well, who owns this land? Are they open to it? Is there a way to pay them? So there's a sequence of events that need to happen. But I have to say to you, I am optimistic. It's not a given. We have to make a case for it. And the OPW is not the only avenue here. There is an avenue where we, as a community, can also take some of this information and move forward with it without the OPW, without the Cork County Council.
Would be more than happy to collaborate on that.
Awesome, thank you.
We want to take some names with it.
Yeah.
But the deeper part of your question, so I'm glad you answered that, is that there was a study and they tried to involve nature-based solutions in their reckoning. But it's almost as if the OPW, the council, found it hard to take this in, because what we're talking about is quite a radically different approach to what they're used to. And so they were kind of, well, what do we do about it? It's almost like they're obliged to do nature-based solutions. It even says it in the International Panel for Climate Change, we will use nature-based solutions to try and address future problems. So it's global. And so all these councils and all these organisations are struggling, like the Department for Agriculture. Everybody's struggling with this. And we need to show this is a way forward. So we need to demonstrate that it can be done at low cost, low impact of farming. We keep the food going, keep the crisps going. You know. But at least the councils didn't stop. They came back and said, well, how do we go forward? And they contacted. So we contacted Liam, they contacted us. And at least we're having a chance to show you what you could have. You may decide not to have it, or somebody else might decide not to have it. You might say, this is pie in the sky. But we have done it. We have saved some communities. We have cleaned up some rivers. So, it's up to you. Do we want to do this in your area?
Thank you.
Use the microphone just in case other people can hear. Thank you.
Thank you. The water that's collected in the bund, is that from flowing water from the couple of fields above it, or is it from overflow from streams, or is it piped from the streams onto the land?
Right. So the answer to this question, it depends. So most times, if we put an offline bund in like this, so we want water to come, the really high flow in the channel, so we want all the rest to go through and end up in the sea. But the stuff that comes in your house, we want that to go into the field. So that's an offline one. But in that area, when it's raining, there will be rivers of water coming down the field that will also enter the bund. And where you can see the yellow line there, is it yellow? Any overland flow that hits there that would have ordinarily gone into the stream gets deflected into the bund. So it always does both. But the primary function of this is to get peak flow from the channel. In other circumstances where it's muddy floods that are the issue running off fields, we might just put a big online pond just to capture and get that sediment. Yeah, so it's choosing the right design for your farm or lawn. If you've got a floodplain, floodplains tend to be like this. Middle of the farm will be more like sediment traps, wetlands.
Question over here.
Thank you both very much. It's so interesting. You were mentioning about right measures in the right place, and I understand that the greatest gains can be made upstream, around our town. But is there any inclusion in your work in the smaller scale residential township, because the catchment area flooding affected, of course, the urban centre? There's so many houses that have had their gardens paved over. There's so many business and residential developments that have no landscaping. And I was listening to a podcast recently that was about the floods in New Orleans, and they are obviously dealing with now even worse situation than we've had. And every individual is trying to be a part of the solution, not just looking to business and agriculture and the government. So things like French drains and people actually having gardens again, as opposed to glorified car parks. So do you address that in your measures, and is that something communities have wanted elsewhere?
So back in, I believe it was May, there was a national urban rainwater management plan launched. And that is specifically, so the government is thinking about this, and it's gone down to all the councils. And I know the Cork County Council, I brought it up in meetings, and they have people thinking and writing about this. And that's what you're talking about is, and as you said, Paul, it's rain. How do we manage it when it's falling and where it's falling? So there's a lot that can be done. We would use a term, sustainable urban drainage schemes. And there's a lot of measures that can be put into both your garden. I know I got a text the other night from the Enniscorthy Lawborough people who said that they're providing free of charge rainwater butts for households. So I don't know how much they cost, they're like 200, 250 euro, but you can now put them in your, you can retain the rainwater yourself. Grass, of course, you know, you can go wild with it in terms of green roofs, and I brought my students to Mallorca, a desert island, and in Lidl, they have Lidl there, of course, a lot of you have been to Mallorca. I was a little bit reluctant to park in it, but the parking lots, the spaces, had these like honeycombed structures with grass growing out of them, and where soil had been trapped, and this is Lidl. So perhaps go and talk to Midleton and say, hey, your partners in Mallorca and Spain have taken this approach to sustainable drainage in their plot of land. So there's lots that can be done. And there's a lot of education that should happen. Yeah, so I agree with you. We're not doing urban areas, we're doing rural areas. But it's part of the discussion because we've got to use, as Paul says, every toolbox in our tool, every tool in our toolbox.
What's just something for you, Liam, for planning?
Yeah, so having driven around, we were quite surprised to see new houses without sizable storage areas. But what we found with visiting your community yesterday is that the water came externally. So even if you can control some of your water locally, which is always good, we encourage it, and it will be part of our portfolio of nature-based solutions, is what do we do first? So we need to start knocking out some of the big peaks, okay? Because one of the things that we're really interested in is some of the villages further up the catchment. Have you been flooded? Was it only Midleton, or was it these little villages? So we often say, well, let's protect all the villages up to a good standard, and you might start reductions in severity in Midleton. Not for free, because you've obviously paid for a scheme to protect all the villages. But we've often said that everybody lives everywhere in the catchments these days. Everybody needs some protection. Therefore, it does start to stack up in terms of numbers. And then some of the bigger urban areas, you have to store the water because they are catchments in the wrong way. And so what we call these pluvial floods, when they get deluged, you need to just store the water temporarily. The only problem we've had with that, because I am a civil engineer, but I've built SUDs in various towns, is that the companies charge 10 times as much as we would charge on a farm. So we put a pond on a farm, 5,000, 10,000. If it was a SUD in your street, somebody comes and fleeces you for about $500,000. And that's the problem with its own right. So one of the things that we will try and do is make sure that when these features are built, they're built by local companies, by farms themselves with diggers, rather than a construction company with a hard hat and high vis. They put up a big cabin, and they get the lunch and the toilets, and then they come and build something, because that's where you lose loads of money. So we do have to be careful on cost. So if we can get low-cost solutions for SUDs, that's a good idea.
If I can?
Yeah.
I'm from Midleton. I'm living here 25 years, originally Czech, from Willowbank. Very lucky. I'm one of 10 houses which were flooded all year once, yes. Means I'm very, very interested in flood protection. I wrote a number of studies about it and so on. Your idea is perfect. I 100% agree with you both. We have a small engineering company. We are local. Means I'm offering my service. Nice story. I met my partner on flood protection project of Marina substation. We did it. It was 5 times flooded with no water in substation. That's our record. And we would like to know. It's our new contacts. I need to run away because I'm going tomorrow morning for business trip.
Yeah.
But I will give you contact. And I will be very, very interested to work in this scheme. Do really low cost protection. If I can give one detail, I seen somewhere in Sweden or Norway, they got exactly the same, and they got fantastic thing. A small prefabricated piece where is the 20 centimeters cup
in the middle, and it manages storage. The water is normally flowing through that because there's a small stream. In case of flood, it simply protects the water, it raises up, sometimes going over, but that's that storage area. We would like to do those prefabricated pieces and simply those engineering things for you, but you have to tell us where.
Yeah.
And we'll give you low-cost price for that. That's what we can find.
Too close, price.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're willing to, we sometimes call this the living experiment. We kind of try things out. So if it's in a smaller ditch, then it might work. But some of the farmers we spoke to yesterday, we visited farmers of your estate. Yes, we were talking about taking the ditches, which are very deep, and just widening them. Don't have them so deep. Have the same capacity, but make it wide, so that the water flows really slowly. And there's some little tweaks like that. So your structures can go in and you widen channels. But it's really important that most of the water keeps going. It's only the peak we want to get. But on farms, we also want a little bit of sediment traps and get rid of the nitrate and the phosphate.
Hi, thank you. You kept mentioning it once in a lifetime. The last big magnitude of storm was in 1942, and the one before that was in 1902. But we'll just talk about the last one. Within no time whatsoever, it was about 3 feet outside my house. And what I'm coming at is that there was a natural drainage in that when the tide is out. The one. So when we were looking that the tide was out when the flood came, and we were also looking at it was by day. So we were in the drop barriers and whatever. But is there a possibility that in these bows, dams, that you could have some kind of hold it until the tide goes out and leave it off then? Because there was 3 feet of water outside my house. The tide, it went down to about 2 feet, and when the tide came in, it came back up to about 2.5 feet. But once the tide turned, there wasn't a drop of water in 3 hours outside my house. 3 hours until gone.
Can you use the microphone for something I can't hear you?
Okay. Yeah, I think, the tide is another compounding factor. So we say we want these to drain within 12 hours. So there may be a worse point where these are draining and you still have tide. What we would say is if you want Midleton to function, then the whole wave has got to slow down, so that all the water arrives slower, which gives an opportunity for the tide to do its work. So if everything's moving slower, it might, I'm not going to guarantee it might help that situation. But if you're stuck, so there's loads of places, Cork, where if the tide comes in and you have a really big flood, you may be in trouble. And that's why people are running around thinking, what's the solution? We'd argue that a 10-year solution, or a lifetime solution, is to keep adding storage to the catchment. And you can imagine that the slower it is, the less likely the loss scenario is. Can't guarantee it, but your words saying that if water rose in 3 hours or something, that's harrowing to me, because this is a big system. It should be taking 10 hours to reach a peak, So something else is happening that's allowing everything to come down too quickly. So you need to think of it like a traffic jam. We need a traffic jam. Bang, 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 bang. Every time we see fast water, it should be slowed down. It's a very, very simple design concept. Very difficult to implement, but the design, slowing anything you can, might help that.
That's the questions there as well.
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for the presentation and Liam for organising this Davis Camp and TT here on the staff of all, and we've taken with your ideas. Slightly off topic, there are proposals to build very large solar farms north of Midleton. Now, can you tell me, are there any studies which might indicate what impact they might have on what you're talking about on
flood and water flow, water pressure and so forth. Thank you.
We don't know much about that yet. I think somebody's going to try and tell us something about it. We heard from Jeffrey, told us a little bit about it. I think he knows. But yeah, the jury's out. I would say that if it's done properly, it should have no impact, or it should be negligible. But that does mean that if these solar panels are going to go on steeper slopes, that you should actually make sure that that water is intercepted. If you were building a road or a house, you have to store that water. So you should do the same rule for solar panels. The only thing that we might suggest is, if it was a field like this with compacted soil and you put a solar farm here, I would object because I want food. Alright? But if they did put one here, then the soil would start to recover and the infiltration would start to rise just due to natural recovery of the soil. So it's a tricky question. My hunch is that if it's done properly, it should have no impact. So long as you still have potatoes.
Just a question there, and thanks for the presentation. My interpretation from this evening's presentation is that a lot of these interventions are upstream, they're before they get to the town, and a lot of what the OPW and their consultants design is for within the town for mitigating once the water gets there. So for you guys to engage with the OPW and their engineers and for them to kind of buy into some sort of impact, because they will look at this as an impact on their system downstream. How much of this can be done via modelling? Because a lot of what I've seen here tonight, a lot was like we build it, we need to build it a little bit bigger, you have to engage with landowners, but before that process starts, particularly in Midleton, which has a number of rivers, have you been able to kind of like assess whether this is feasible to be modelled and proven to be taken on board with the OPW's proposed solutions?
Do you want to go for that one first?
Well, I'll just say, and then I'll hand over to you. So we believe, as a summary comment, that if these nature-based solutions are built at scale, that they will contribute to the performance of any flood scheme that's down in Midleton. It can only help, it will not hinder. In terms of modelling, well, we are using modelling, we're using GIS and hydrodynamic modelling in our process. But we're also field scientists, and we need to know, you can look at a million things in a model, which is always a simplistic version of reality. They're helpful tools, but you actually need to get into the field, walk the land, and speak to the people who actually can tell you where the water flows, because they've seen it. It's a really important part of the process. So we support modelling, we agree and disagree with some of the outputs, but it's part of a process of using a much wider range of tools.
Yeah, so Aaron, who wrote the report for Midleton, actually my ex-PhD student, so they wrote a fair and honest report, and it was rather taken as, well, that's going to be tricky, let's do a traditional scheme, which is the reason why we're here to start saying, no, hang on. What they said was, if you put 100,000 cubic meters of storage, you get 6%. If you put 200,000, you get 10%. I don't know whether the numbers are good, but it's a sliding scale. The more you add, and it's properly designed, the safer it will be. I can't tell you exactly, but the more you have, the better it'll be. So try and keep going. And we want these models to pick that up. Don't at the moment. They don't pick up the nuances of this design, such as it being offline and only doing the peak of the storm, the top third of the storm. Good estimate, and they're not very accurate. We still need to add knowledge to these models to show that they can function better. So the model has to be better. So we're agreeing with you.
Yeah.
But we can't, but in this case, the modelling has almost said, oh, it's safer to just build a really big set of ponds. And we're saying, no, you've got it wrong. We need to slow things down and have defences, and you might also want some property level defences and some insurance. You need all the tools in the toolbox.
So just to add to that, a point I've made to the County Council, which they have accepted, is that because it's still proof of concept when built at scale, one of the things that they will encourage to happen is to instrument each and every measure to see its performance and to monitor things like maintenance. and how it's going. And that would be fantastic to add, proof and data to the cost-benefit analysis of this. The second thing I'd like to say is we're talking about dealing with water before it arrives in Midleton. I think the OPW, and I'm uncomfortable talking about it because I don't really know much about it, I have not reviewed it, deal with it when it's here already. So the way to think about it is, well, let's do that. But also let's deal with it where it's landing before it hits you and see what happens to that.
We'll have the last question here.
And it's just to build on the last point that was made about solar farms. How can the community assess without expert advice what properly looks like in terms of the planning around the solar farms? Just in the key, some of the key points that you mentioned, like about the speed of water flowing from land. I can imagine with 400 acres covered in panels, that would be quite fast. So how can we calculate what the impact of that will be downstream in the town of Midleton without expert advice, because we're not sure, we're not confident at this point that will be factored in to the planning of the solar farms.
I think Paul mentioned that this was kind of a new phenomenon that's appearing now with this growth of solar panels. I think Paul has also said you will have to build something they will have the responsibility to build something to retain the water that they are generating on that parcel of land, to retain it on the land and to not impact any floods that are happening in the river. That would be part of the planning permission, I would have assumed. In terms of you being an expert, no, you're not. You do need to engage an expert to give you knowledge and power to make the argument, and they'll only listen to data-driven, not any kind of suppositions that might be made. So my advice is organise to get an expert. Yeah.
Do we have one more? So we'll put 9 o'clock's the next round number.
9 o'clock news.
Thank you. I understand that in the UK, a prime example of nature-based solutions is the town of Pickering in Yorkshire, which is held up as an example of where it's working. And I wonder if it's still working. It's, I think it's about 12, 15 years old, one of the early examples. And if there are comparisons with Midleton, it's about the same size town, for example. I don't know much about the catchment area of Pickering in Yorkshire, but has, in your opinion, is it still working, or has it sort of, are there doubts about it?
Yeah, so at the dawning of this period of natural flood management, as we call it, there was my scenario in Belford, which was a small village scenario, in fact. Then there was Pickering, which is a bigger system, okay? And then there was JBA did some work now, Somerset, whatever his name. And these were put up as exemplars that it could work. Now the case in Pickering is really interesting because they put in lots of leaky dams and things and tried to stop the water coming out. Some of them, a bit like our features now that have been in for 15 years, they're starting to look a bit old, and some of them, they're becoming too leaky in many cases, so they are in need of maintenance. But the most interesting thing about Pickering is they built a proper flood storage area. So we would say, is that natural flood management? Now they claim to be natural flood management because they put a big bond around the floodplain, but it cost £2.5 million, but it stored a hell of a lot more. Okay, so we would like to think that people like the OPW are going to build structures like that in Midleton because they cost more, you get more volume, and we've even used the term today, hybrid, something that's between this and a big flood storage reservoir, something that's using this knowledge but might use big ponds, maybe 2 metres high. So the OPW then in Clonakilty did put in some quite big soil ponds, and that's kind of halfway between this and traditional engineering. So I think there is opportunity. Pickering's still working because of that pond. But I've spoken to some people in Pickering who have been flooded from the fields, and they were overlooked, the villages were overlooked, Pickering was prioritised. So I think that this idea of helping everybody down the system would also help Pickering. But maintenance is your issue. Okay? So because the big pond is owned by the Environment Agency, they maintain it, whereas the leaky dams, lots of them, some of them very big, maybe they're not being looked at.
Any more questions?
It's up to there's somebody over there who's got quite a few.
There's,
Right.
there's. University College Cork,
Thanks, Mary.
yes?
A large part of Midleton and the river catchments lie on cast limestone. How is that going to impact on any nature-based solutions?
What's that?
A large part of the
Yes.
tax.
No, I
Oh,
was-
sorry.
Yeah, there are confounding issues with whether the tide that it has. Things are quite convenient for us because the bit at the bottom with all the cast and where all the features are going in is the scheme. We're working beyond that in the more sedimentary rocks. But we heard some just anecdotal evidence from our visit to you yesterday about the functioning of the caves, keeping the water levels high for longer, and that's probably true. So the way we've thought about it, because we've had limestone in some of our catchments, is a lot of the time you do a lot of good, it's like a lot of water. But when everything's full, including the limestone, then everything's surface water. Every drop of rain is moving. There may be a slight legacy effect of water going down into the canal system and then reappearing. I'm not sure what to do about that. Okay? But the problem of walls of water moving down into Midleton, that's what floods you. It's a wall of water. Coming down in 3 hours instead of 10 hours. You need to spread out. But look at that. So the chalk is a nightmare. Anything you can tell us would help. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed for your presentations. Very interesting. One or two points that I'd like to ask about. Just you mentioned Pickering. Just in comparative sizes, the river in Pickering carries about 1/5 of the volume of the only current. So it's a little bit bigger than the Duncorney River. The accumulator that it has is vast. And if we were to put one in Midleton and scale it up by 5 times, presumably, or something not far distant from that, and then their accumulator is very close to being on the limit of regulations governing water storage and the height of the volume of water that's contained. And just by way of example, they have 190 leaky dams. Up to 10 years of age, they're looking tired, and it's going to be a big maintenance cost. I think they're working through them progressively, but suddenly they're going to be hit with a number, I don't know, I'm guessing 40, 50 to be overhauled in a year, and that's a big budget on somebody. But nonetheless, it is, from what I have seen personally, it is a successful project, and the whole concept is tremendously worthwhile. But if you scale up the amount of work that's been done onto a river of our size or a catchment of our size, there are a lot of leaky dams, a lot of small pools to make up the amount of accumulation required. But it does work in 10 years of operational whereabouts. They have not had a flood in the town of Pickering, whereas Yorkshire is awash this year, and once or twice in previous years. But that's not my question. My question is, if I may ask, is something that until this evening I hadn't thought about, but is there any potential for, you mentioned that it takes a whole winter to fill up the groundwater. Can we assist that at all by drilling, for example, or piercing the surface layer of soil and trying to get water stored in groundwater rather than running fast?
First thing to point out is we're talking about the lower part of the soil, between 30 centimetres and a metre. that seems to be the most impacted bit of soil compacted for 200 years of farming. So anything that brings back, so regenerative farming is seen as a really good thing. Worms are best. Worms can do all the work, but you need healthy soil, right? Now, I truly believe in healthy soil. It's just that I don't see much of it because farming is farming. To get the food, they have to do certain things. And so, if we say the worst case scenario is that we do have a degraded soil, then we've got to start looking at these elevated runoff levels. Anything that can get water into it won't be drilling. The only thing we've done on dairy farms is run a deep plough through it. Not just a mole drain, but it kind of lifts the soil. Now, under minimum tillage practices and things, and reseeding, they have to do a shallow scrape. We actually bought a machine, or part of the project where they bought a machine shared between all the farmers in the River Eden, where they were able to really put some macropods back into the soil, and that helped. But it really helped with the pollution. I'm not sure it really helped with flooding, or we couldn't prove it. Okay. So, as I said, even if you have got a healthy soil and a really good forest, when it's all full and it's still raining, that's a scenario we've got to start looking at. So we need this extra storage. The forest is really good. We were on a floodplain today where it was working perfectly. We don't have to do anything. The water ploughs through this floodplain and there's loads of trees. That's we call that roughness. The roughness of the surface can really help slow down flow. So I think we've got to manage the worst case scenario. That's what I'm saying for flooding. It's great that we can bring the whole catchment back to some sort of water balance where we get less floods, less droughts, and there's less pollution. We still get happy. Is that win-win-win? For flooding, you just need a little extra. You need some storage at the top, some storage in the middle, some things slowing everything down in floodplains, and you need the defences, and you might need some probably weather protection. You need all the tools in the toolbox.
Hi, Anne. I'm just wondering, with your nature-based solutions, is regenerative farming, as you just touched on, part of that? Because, a healthy soil will retain 70% more water than a conventionally farmed soil. So if more farmers were enticed, and if there was, like the organic farmers are given grants and enticements to farm organically, if the regenerative farmers were given more opportunity, more, just encouragement to farm regeneratively, imagine if everyone was, storing 70% more water.
Yeah, so the first thing to say, is that a message? We love regenerative farms. Do you know why we love it? Because it brings the whole system back to function. Water goes into the ground instead of being in the sea. That's invaluable. It's good for the soil, it's good for the groundwater, it's good for everything. The only thing we noticed, because we have an organic farm, is that when it's raining, we've still got loads of runoff. So it helps for what you call a nuisance level. Everything that goes in the buffer strips, the wetlands and anything, some trees, they all help those smaller storms. But if you're going to try and make a little step towards some bigger and bigger storms, we need both things. We need regenerative farming and we need ponds. Yeah. But if you can get people to do regenerative farming, that's the thing. Okay. I've got regenerative farms and they're getting good yields.
We're on a turn.
Yeah, so they're getting good yields from the crops, but they're not maximising their yields. They're optimising their yields. So, do you want a farming that's optimising, which is a trade-off between production and environmental protection, or is it better to just grow like crazy so that I can have my crisps, which then gives you higher runoff rates, but then you mitigate for the higher runoff rate. So if the reality is that we can't have regenerative farming, you need something else. So I don't know if farmers in here would spontaneously become regenerative farmers or organic farmers. I'm glad you were
I think we might be at a point now where people are wanting a cup of tea or something stronger. Yes, absolutely. You ask your question.
Right. You can be the last question.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I'm just up the road in Midleton, it's literally a stone's throw from here. And I wasn't even in the house that I'm in 6 months when the water came within 2 feet of the front door. Now, I was very lucky, I had a step and another step before I got there, but the person responsible for that is only just here, because responsible for my house not flooding, is because the water came out of the corner of the Midleton estate and came in behind one of the tall buildings here, and they got flooded from the back and the front, which was very, very unfortunate. Now, that's not to say if there was something done to prevent that my house wouldn't flood the next time. To me, what you're showing here is a no-brainer. The Onachora River rises about, 600 feet above sea level, and so 400 to 500 feet maybe from here, and it's about 6 miles away from here as well. Most of the land between here and there is quite hilly, and it makes perfect sense to me for the farmers to be approached to have something done like this. My question is not for yourselves, but is there any local representatives here that can start pushing something like this ahead? Prevention is better than cure. Surely it makes a lot more sense to spend a lot less money preventing something than to be trying to pay for the catastrophe that we had here last October that devastated houses, devastated businesses, and people around here will, there's a high tide advisory tomorrow night and there's a lot of rain coming. I'm nervous already, and this isn't a yellow warning, but we don't know which this storm that's coming from the state, what way it's going to track and what the outcome is going to be. So I think, this is something that if there is any local representative here that can say, yes, we can do something about this and we can start maybe fast tracking this. I'm sure the farmers around the place have approached properly and told what a prevention this would be for the people in Midleton.
Yeah.
It just seems a no-brainer that I can tell.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment, and I think it's a lovely way to end up. But I did ask you on our potential classroom, I want you to stick up your hands, because I want to know, Paul wants to know. Do you think you've learned something new and beneficial to you and just how you're thinking about floods? Question one, thank you. That makes it all worthwhile.
Yes.
Secondly, all of you who've been through the absolute ringer in terms of floods, if something was to move forward, would you be prepared to support it with your time, your effort, your tax dollars, or whatever? Are you going to be okay with this? It's not going to fix the big floods. It is going to contribute towards that, but it's going to improve things. Would you support it? Do you think it's something you'd like to support? Absolutely.
Yes. Sure.
Yes. All right. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank Mary and Paul for a really encouraging presentation here this evening, and just like to thank you all for coming out and listening with open minds, and also to My Place for hosting us so well tonight. Thanks very much. If anybody would like to come to talk about how we might come together as a community and how we might get working on this in conjunction with experts, feel free to get in contact with me. Thanks very much.